I have lots of things to get off my chest, but I have to be sure that this is a safe space. I can't really tell you all that happened, but I will tell you enough to make you see how much of a terrible person I am. I will tell you how I did not tell my husband about my first encounter with Uncle George. How I fanned the flames until it blew up in my face. This is the story of how I lost my beautiful marriage because of a careless mistake I never expected could happen to me. Especially with Uncle George, my dad's best friend. People are never what they make us believe they are. Uncle George, my dad's best friend and my godfather, is proof that every human is a wolf. Some try to hide it in lamb's skin, while others let their wolf side run free. Uncle George is the latter. Whenever I remember what happened and how it happened, I become very sad and angry. Not at Uncle George, but at myself. Why did I allow myself to be alone with the man that night? And worst of all, why did I keep going back for more? My name is Edna, and I destroyed the magical relationship I had with my eyes opened. My parents did not have many friends. This is what growing in a Black-dominated area would do to you. Everyone saw us as intruders. Everyone except our next-door neighbor, Uncle George. Uncle George was around my dad's age. He had the kindest smile I had ever seen. Even now, with all the little wrinkles on his face, Uncle George still had that smile. My parents had me while they were young. I can't remember how old they were, but they were very young. I was a bundle of joy to them. Their little girl, their beautiful little girl. I grew up in a household of love. Our house was always so full, I did not feel the loneliness that only children feel. My dad was present, my mom was an angel, and there was my godfather, Uncle George, with his very kind smile and athletic build. I knew we were not really accepted in my neighborhood, but I had Uncle George, and that was all that mattered. He was more than a godfather to me. He was also my best friend. Maybe this is why I was not uncomfortable that night. Maybe this is why I was shocked and could not scream. Maybe I wanted it to happen. My relationship with Uncle George changed when I turned 16. I started noticing things about him that I did not notice before. He was handsome. He had dreamy blue eyes and pink lips. He was tall, with bulgy muscles and a very well-trimmed beard. Uncle George began to look like one of those supermodels I fantasize about when I touch myself. I even touched myself to a picture of him before. I did not understand that at the time I was crushing on him. It was a terrible crush. I would touch his arms during our evening walks, climb on his backs. I even attempted to touch his rod. It happened once. I don't think he liked it. But I did not care. I mean, all I needed was for him to be mine, for him to take me and make me his. It did not happen, though. I remember getting angry at him when he married his wife. I would not talk to Uncle George till I left for college. This was not normal, because he and I were inseparable. I sulked for months, and he did not pay attention to me. My parents thought it was the usual teenage frenzy, but it wasn't. There was another woman in my Uncle George's house, on his bed, being banged with his huge rod, kissing his pink lips, holding those broad shoulders, and calling him husband. It was too much to bear. It was crazier knowing I could not talk about it to anybody. I would leave for my room when he came around with his wife and stay there till they left. I couldn't help myself, you see. Even when he came to talk to me, I stormed out on him. I guess he knew what I was going through but could not say or do anything about it. Uncle George practically raised me. Doing anything with me would almost be like incest. But I did not care. He betrayed me by marrying someone else. That was all that mattered to me at the time. By the time I came home for summer holiday, Uncle George had moved to another part of the country. That was one of the saddest days of my life, knowing that I would not get to see him standing on his front porch waving at me with his beautiful smile. I missed him more because I did not get to express my feelings to him. Well, I got my chance, years later, to express my feelings to him, and that was my pitfall. With Uncle George gone, I had to call myself to order. I needed to get over him as fast as I could, and in my search for a rebound guy, I met Martin. Martin was one of the most beautiful boys in college. The fact that he looked like Uncle George even helped him more. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and very fine. I could not even play hard to get with this boy, because I knew he could get whomever he wanted. Martin was too good to be used as a rebound guy. He was too fine to be used and dumped. I decided to give our relationship my all, even though in my mind, it was Uncle George that I saw any time I looked at Martin. Our relationship was magical and full of adventure. I remember how we'd stay up all night, play drinking games with friends, and end the night making love on the living room floor. And, oh my gosh, Martin's head game was top-notch. It was hard to keep still with that kind of pleasure coursing through your body like a million electric shocks. Martin knew what to do with a woman's body, and he did things to me. Things that I did not think any man could do to me. Gradually, my crush for Uncle George waned to a dot in my memory. Although I still remembered his baritone and his thick arms, it was just in passing. Martin was the center of my world, and I was the center of his. What was supposed to be a rebound ended up being true love. Martin and I got married immediately after college. It was a small but magical wedding, the kind we wanted. Everything was perfect. I remember what Martin whispered to me on our first dance. I would love you till the end of time. And he was going to do it. Love me till the end of time. When I thought the wedding was the height of our romance, Martin and I went to the Maldives for our honeymoon. I had never heard of the country before, but the experience, the romance, the nightlife, things I would never forget. Martin made every day in the 1WK we spent there memorable, especially the last night. I can't remember all we did that day, but I remember all Martin did to me in our hotel room. Martin entered God mode with his bedroom skills. He must have taken an enhancer or something, because even after blowing off 3 times, he kept pounding me, hard and soft. Yeah, I'm sure we disturbed the neighbors, but we were weird like that. I'm always sad whenever I remember what I had with Martin. It was more than magical. It is even more heartbreaking to know that I burst a hole in our marriage. Life with Martin was going beautifully well until tragedy struck, and I lost my parents. They were both still young. I thought they would meet their grandkids and love them as much as they loved me. My parents had an accident on their way home from the mall and died before help could get to them. I can think of it now as a very poetic way to go with the love of your life beside you, but at that time, it hurt more than anything. I was broken. I mean, very broken. There was nothing Martin could do to save me. Absolutely nothing. I was so broken that I left my parents in the morgue for almost a month hoping a miracle would happen, or hoping this was a bad dream. The condolence visits, the calls, texts, and sorry faces around me did not help me. I wanted it to be a bad dream. I wanted so badly to wake up. But it was real. Very real. I had lost my parents, and I knew my life will never be the same. I buried them 1 month after their passing. It was a quiet and teary funeral, with Martin holding me from breaking down. It was in my broken state that day that I heard that familiar baritone call my name, Eddie. Only one person calls me that. I turned, and to my greatest surprise, Uncle George was standing there, wearing his perfect smile, this time with a touch of pain in it. I left Martin immediately and fell into his arms. Was that my first mistake? Maybe. But I was mourning my parents, and Uncle George was the closest I had to a father. I laid in his arms, soaking in his smell, embracing those arms I had fantasized about, and remembering all over again. Martin stood there, watching me cry on another man's shoulders and said nothing. He could not be jealous at that moment. I had just buried my parents. Looking back, I wish he was jealous that day. I wish he dragged me away from the embrace of my Uncle George, but he didn't. We stayed like that for a while longer before he let me go. I returned to Martin, but something inside me awoke, and I knew I had to see more of Uncle George. I would not see Uncle George again for about 2 months or so. These 2 months that followed my parents' death were the darkest in my life. I was alone. I felt alone, though I had Martin. I would brood, cry, and drink. Yeah, I took to drinking. I knew I could not change what had happened and that the world was violent and strange. But why? I had a lot of questions with no one to answer them. So, I laid about, doing the little I could do, but slipping away fast. Martin tried to be there for me, but I blocked all of his efforts. Soon enough, we became strangers. And in this period of vulnerability, Uncle George showed up again. Uncle George showed up at our doorstep on a Friday afternoon. I remember that day like it was yesterday, maybe because it was the day my life changed. Martin had called him to see if he could do something about the state that was in. And he came. I had heard our doorbell ring, and for some weird reason, I stood up to answer it. Opening the door, I was met with the beautiful smile of this man. Although with age marks on his face, Uncle George was still very beautiful. Just like at my parents' funeral, I fell into his arms without a word. Martin could not say anything. He could not do anything. My husband stood there watching me take solace in another man's arms. I don't think he knew about the past I had with Uncle George, or he felt anything could happen between us. He just wanted his wife back, and he was ready to do anything. That Friday was the best day I had had since my parents died. Martin could not understand what was happening to me, or what magic Uncle George performed, but he was glad I was laughing after a long time. And indeed, I was. Uncle George told me stories of things I did as a child, how I frustrated my parents, and all those sadly happy memories. We shared a lot of stories that day, but I did not share the one I would have loved to share. The reason I was hostile to him. The reason I stopped talking to him. Well, until he told me about his wife. Uncle George's wife had filed for divorce and demanded full custody of their children. And for some funny reasons, she got it. He is only allowed to see the children twice in a month with supervision. He did not tell me the reason for the divorce, and I did not ask. But somewhere in my heart, I was happy he was alone. I was happy I could call him my Uncle George again. I was already slipping, but I did not know. Things were not bad yet, but they were about to be, sooner than I thought. Martin had prepared the visitor's room for Uncle George, since he was staying for a week. Although I did not show it, I was happy he was staying with us. Uncle George brought life to our house, and Martin saw it. I even allowed Martin to touch me for the first time after 2 months. But it was not Martin that I wanted. Uncle George and I bonded some more the second and third day of his stay. Nothing seemed off. I was even able to control myself very well. We got so comfortable that I hinted at why I was angry with him. He smiled and told me that he knew, but could not do anything about it. I think that was when things took another turn. It was the 4th day of his stay that things began to happen. I did not expect these things to happen, but somewhere in my heart, I wanted them to happen. Martin had traveled for a business trip, leaving me in the house with Uncle George. We had our usual feel of fun. This time, there was a slight shift. Maybe because I had told him about my childhood crush on him. I noticed he was a little more gentle, assertive, and touchy. I did not give it too much thought at the time. We were watching my parents' favorite TV series and laughing when I felt a cold hand on my thigh. I knew it was Uncle George, but I did not know how to respond. The hand was cold and warm, hard and soft, balanced and over the bar. I felt beads of sweat gathering on my brow, but I did not say anything, neither did Uncle George. He did not even think to look at me, or ask if I was comfortable with his hand being where it was. He just placed it there and fixed his gaze on the moving images on the TV. The tension in the air was too much, but it was about to get worse. I think he noticed that I was uncomfortable with his hand on my thigh, so he removed it. Soon after, he excused himself to the loo, leaving me in a pool of my thoughts. Why did he remove his hand? Did he think I was angry? I thought about a lot of things in that small time he was away. Uncle George came back some few minutes after, and this time he sat very close to me, close enough to wrap his left arm around my waist. I was shocked. What is this? Has my morally upright Uncle George suddenly turned into something else? I could have stopped him at that point, but I wanted to see the end of this, whatever it is. His fingers played on the smalls of my back, drawing shapes and tracing my vertebral column. I was already going into another state. I needed to stop this before he turned something else, but I couldn't. It was like I was compelled to keep quiet and stay. I tried talking, but I only let out a moan. From drawing shapes with his fingers, Uncle George moved to my bra. Noticing I did not wear one, his finger traveled to my front side, and that was my end. Uncle George went from drawing shapes on my back to heavy kisses. I stopped him at first, even went into my room. But he followed me. He did not force me. All he did was pull me into his arms. He kissed me again, this time more intimately. I could have pushed him away or even shouted at him, but I was too surprised to move. We held that position as we undressed each other. Uncle George made love to me that day, from the floor to the bed to the bathroom. I had waited for this day all my life, but I never expected it to happen. That day was the first of many intimate moments we would share. What I had felt for him before returned in full force. I don't know how to describe this, but Uncle George had captured all of me in 3 days. Just 3 days. We continued with our little meetings till he left our house. Martin never found out. In fact, Martin gave him a very big hug the day he left. You would think now that he was out of the house, I would stop. Well, think again. Uncle George and I kept a secret routine in a motel far from the house. We met there several times. I began to withdraw from my husband. I would not allow him to touch me. I would get angry if he touched my phone, and I would use the reverse psychology pull on him if he complained about my actions. I had fallen out of love with Martin, but I did not know how to tell him. I did not know how to tell him that my heart now belongs to my Uncle George. I was digging a hole in my marriage with my own hands. The day Martin found out about Uncle George and I think, would be one of the saddest days of his life. I had left my phone in the living room, a big mistake, and was in the bathroom. I did not know that Martin knew my password. He got hold of the phone, opened it, and the first text he saw was, "Uncle George's." I came out, prepared to go out, and saw my husband with my phone, in tears. He could not hold it back. I saw how broken he was, but I did not care. I had my Uncle George, and that was all that mattered. I collected my phone and left the house. I thought, finally, I'm free. Little did I know that I was in for a huge surprise. I left the house with the little I could carry, plotting my new life with my Uncle George. I had thought about everything, down to the number of children we'd have. I was happy. I'm finally going to be with my Uncle George. Well, my happiness turned to sand in my mouth when I got to the hotel. I met Uncle George all right. I was giving him the good news and smiling from ear to ear when I heard a knock on the door. I thought it was room service. But before we could ask them in, a woman barged into our room, looking like she was prepared to kill. I recognized the woman immediately. It was Uncle George's wife. They stared at each other for what seemed like eternity. Before my eyes, Uncle George went down on his knees begging his wife, accusing me of seducing him, and making me up to be a bad person. She stormed out, and without a thought for me or the good news I was telling him, Uncle George grabbed his car keys and ran after her. Sadly, my Uncle George had lied to me. He was still very married to his wife, and I was a fantasy he needed to fulfill. Martin filed for divorce 2 weeks later. He did not tell them what I did. I begged him to reconsider. He refused. The divorce was finally a month after. In 1 year, I lost my parents and lost my husband because of a childish fantasy. I have been without a man for 2 years now. I don't care for life that much. I just live each and every day with so much regret, losing my magical marriage for a crush and getting crushed in the process. If you want to see more infidelity stories, then click on the video you see now on your screen.